The Shadow Pact, a reckoning at Cypress Grove. The unthinkable decree. The air in Colleton County was thick with more than just the usual southern humidity in the spring of 1841. It was thick with scandal. Silas Rutledge, a man whose ambition forever nipped at the heels of his modest station, had done the unthinkable. At a gathering of the county's most prominent families, he stood before them and declared that his daughter Catherine, a 28-year-old woman of considerable size, whose mind was said to be as unwell as her body was, to be placed under the absolute authority of an enslaved man named Ezekiel Cross. This was not to be a medical arrangement or a temporary measure. It was a total surrender of control. In the eyes of their society, where a white woman's purity and protection were sacrosanct, Silas had effectively declared his own daughter less valuable than his property. The whispers that followed were not of sympathy, but of horrified fascination. They thought they understood the depth of Silas's shame. They had no idea they were witnessing the first move in a much darker game. By November, the whispers had turned to screams. Catherine's form had transformed in ways that defied explanation. 13 of the county's most powerful men were dead, and Cypress Grove Plantation was nothing but embers and memory. The question that hung in the smoky air was simple. What had truly transpired between that enslaved man and the plantation owner's daughter in those intervening months? A gilded cage and a poisoned mind. Cypress Grove was not the grandest plantation in South Carolina, but it was Silas Rutledge's entire world. He was a gaunt man, carved from worry and obsession, his hair having surrendered its color long before its time. His wife had died, bringing Catherine into the world, leaving him with a daughter and a burning need to ascend a social ladder that was slick with the blood of the enslaved. Catherine had grown up in gilded isolation. By 1841, she was a specter in her own home, her body swollen from countless treatments for hysteria and nervous disorders. The local doctors, with their mercury and laudanum, had ensured she was either sedated or lost to violent fits. Society saw a madwoman. They did not see a witness. They did not know that at the age of 12, Catherine had seen something in the cellar that had fractured her world, and that her father had spent the subsequent 16 years poisoning her into silence. The command came from a letter sealed with red wax, bearing the sigil of a scythe crossed with wheat, the mark of the brethren of the harvest. Silas was in their debt, a sum so vast it meant his ruin. The brethren offered an alternative, a demonstration of loyalty. He would humiliate himself and his daughter publicly, placing her under the complete control of a slave. In return, his debts would vanish. For a man like Silas, who believed power was the only true currency, it was no choice at all. The healer and the avenger, Ezekiel Cross, arrived at Cypress Grove with a reputation for being quiet and capable. A man skilled in herbal remedies. What the bill of sale did not mention was the fire in his soul. He was a tall man, his frame hard from a life of labor, but his eyes held an unnerving, direct intelligence. He did not look away from Silas Rutledge, and that alone made the plantation owner uneasy. When left alone in the small cabin assigned to him, Ezekiel allowed his mask to slip. From a hidden pouch, he retrieved a fragile piece of paper. On it, 3 names were written in a child's hand: Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth, his family. Silas Rutledge had sold them away from him 3 years prior, not for profit, but to prove his ruthlessness to the brethren. Ezekiel had learned they had all died in the brutal fields of Alabama. His placement here was no accident. It was the culmination of a 2-year journey, a deliberate path toward vengeance. He was there to learn Silas's secrets, to find his vulnerabilities, and to make him pay. An alliance forged in Rage Catherine's room was a tomb, smelling of sickness and despair. When Ezekiel entered, she greeted him with the expected venom, a cornered animal lashing out. But Ezekiel did not react with force or pity. He opened the curtains, flooding the room with light she had not seen in years. He did not offer more medicine. He questioned its very purpose. "What if the doctors are wrong?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "What if your father has been ensuring you never become well enough to speak of what you saw?" The question hung between them, a dangerous truth spoken aloud for the first time. Catherine's suspicion warred with a desperate, long-buried hope. "Why would you do this?" she whispered. "Because I have my own reasons for wanting Silas Rutledge to suffer," Ezekiel replied, meeting her gaze. "He sold my family to their deaths. The best way to make him suffer is to return to him a daughter who is sane enough to remember everything and strong. Enough to speak of it." In that dim room, an alliance was forged. Catherine was not a victim to be saved, but a partner in vengeance. "I want them all dead," she said, her voice chillingly clear. "Every man who stood in that cellar, and when it is over, you will help me die. I cannot live with these memories." Ezekiel agreed. The pact was sealed. The unraveling. Under Ezekiel's care, Catherine's transformation began. He weaned her from the poisons, replacing them with clean food and strengthening herbs. The process was agonizing, but through the fever and the shakes, her mind began to clear. She told him of the brethren's rituals, a grotesque blend of old-world paganism and perverted spiritualism centered on blood sacrifice and consumption. She showed him her hidden journals, a coded record of her father's atrocities. There was a ledger, hidden in a secret chamber within the cellar. It contained 40 years of evidence, documenting every ritual and every participant, binding them all in shared guilt. But Silas was not a fool. He had anticipated his daughter's resilience. When they descended into the cellar on a night he was supposed to be away, he was waiting for them, surrounded by his brethren. Faced with death, Silas made Ezekiel a twisted offer. Join them, become complicit in their rituals, and in return they would give him the resources to destroy the man in Alabama who had worked his family to death. Refuse, and both he and Catherine would die. Seeing no other path to survival, Ezekiel agreed on the condition that Catherine be set free and sent north. It was a strategic surrender, a play for time. As Catherine was taken away, their eyes met one last time a silent promise that this was not the end. The reckoning for 3 weeks, Ezekiel played his part, a model of subdued obedience. But he was planning. When the night of his initiation arrived, he was brought to the candlelit cellar. The brethren, clad in black robes, presented their test, a young, enslaved woman bound to the altar. Ezekiel was to make the first cut. He took the knife. The brethren watched, their chants rising. And then Ezekiel moved. The blade did not touch the woman. It found the throat of the nearest brethren member. In the chaos that erupted, Ezekiel became a storm of vengeance, fighting with a ferocity born of immeasurable loss. He freed the woman and sent her fleeing upstairs, turning to face the remaining men alone. But he was not alone. Catherine had never left. She had been moving through the slave quarters, weaving a network of rage. The enslaved people of Cypress Grove and its neighbors, whose families had been torn apart by the brethren, answered her call. Armed with scythes and axes, they flooded the cellar, a tide of long overdue justice. The brethren, men of paper and privilege, were swept away. Silas, in a final, desperate act, grabbed Catherine, a knife to her throat. "Do it," she dared him, her voice ice. "It changes nothing. You have already lost." She broke his hold, and Ezekiel was there. The 2 men who had destroyed each other's lives stood face to face. "You took everything from me," Ezekiel said. "Please," Silas begged, the word pathetic on his lips. Ezekiel's response was final. "No mercy. Not for you. Not ever." Ashes and echoes when it was done. They made a choice. The ledger was not evidence that would bring legal justice. It was a death warrant. In a world built on their subjugation, true justice was a secret thing. They burned it, or the cellar, the ledger, the bodies, making it look like a tragic accident. The official story would be that Silas Rutledge and 12 esteemed gentlemen had perished in a fire. Catherine Rutledge was presumed dead within the flames. As the sun rose over the smouldering ruins of Cypress Grove, the 2 architects of its destruction parted ways. Ezekiel headed north to disappear and perhaps help others escape the system that had enslaved him. Catherine, using money she had secretly taken, went her own way, vowing to write down the truth and hide it where it might be found one day, when the world was ready to hear it. They never saw each other again. The whispers of what truly happened that night lived on only in stories told in hushed tones in slave quarters. A legend of the night, the powerless became powerful, and the cruel learned the price of their cruelty. The truth, as it often does, retreated into the shadows, waiting for its time to emerge once more.